Here's why the Federal Reserve is a bad idea, and people have the impression that you cannot live without a central bank. That is simply wrong. This is probably the most powerful institution in the world, but it can be gotten rid of. It's happened twice before in this country. And think about Brexit in England. Think about the fact that Donald Trump got elected as a reality TV star. Things can happen that people do not expect. The end state would be everything the Fed does is done by the Treasury, except for regulating, which should be done by Congress. Okay, but why? Why should we get rid of the Federal Reserve? It's a central bank, basically a central planner. If you think about it, by creating a Fed funds rate, which was only done after World War II as a wartime need but has been kept ever since, that is uneconomic lending. So they basically control the cost of capital and the very shortest of ends. What you have is PhD economists deciding what the cost of capital should be in the country. Does this directly affect the long end? No, it doesn't. But what happens when you cut short-term rates is that you push people out for yield. When rates are low and banks are lending to each other and from the government, what you could easily do is make them term it out. Maybe there's some bonds that are expiring in a week, maybe a month, maybe 3 months. So they would mostly be buying notes. The people that are buying notes maybe buy the 2-year. The 2-year crowd maybe gets pushed out to the 5-year, and so on to the 10 and 30. This way, our government can term out its debt when interest rates are low. That would be a good time to lock in an interest rate, just as you would do for a 30-year mortgage. But the Fed has no profit incentive. They also have no accountability. Nobody gets fired when we have 9% inflation and they're slow to react. What we're seeing with Lisa Cook is that they're not even holding each other accountable. There were multiple insider trading allegations, which were probably true because the people resigned, where supposedly Fed governors were trading futures before a Fed decision. These are entirely unelected bureaucrats. I know that's a buzzword, but it just frankly is what it is. Immediately the response is you need Fed independence because otherwise politicians are going to spend more money than they otherwise could. And I would agree that an independent central bank is better than a dependent central bank. But what I'm saying is that we do not need a central bank. You can see the example through Biden and Trump. In Trump's position, he can blame the Fed for everything wrong that's in the economy. If that was in his Treasury Department, he wouldn't be able to run away from the numbers. And Biden spent way more money than he otherwise could have because the Fed kept rates low. And then everyone said, oh, well, Biden's not at fault, at least all Democrats. He's not at fault for this inflation, even though he spearheaded massive unnecessary stimulus. The mechanics of the United States government is that we have 2 years between elections. That means we may get 1 year without campaigning. That means that the party in power would be very attentive to the inflation rate. And sure, they'll try to blame it on someone else, but it would be much less effective. Would the United States government still have a monopoly on money? Of course. Only the Treasury could print it. Would money still be printed? Of course. Could the Treasury buy debt in order to do yield curve control? Sure. But those losses would be on their scorecard, on the president's scorecard. Other people may say, but if the United States doesn't have a central bank, they cannot compete with Europe and Switzerland. Why would you want to own German bonds that are 30 years out or 10 years out when the United States has a higher yield? What I'm asking for is more market dynamics. If a government wants to pass a massive spending bill that doesn't really make sense, what is the market going to do? It's going to sell off. What happens today? There's a Fed backstop. Bonds do not sell off, and in fact, there hasn't been much credit risk whatsoever, even in high yield bonds. People think during an economic downturn that the Fed is going to bail everyone out, and honestly, they're right. And the number one reason that I want to get rid of the Federal Reserve is because of inequality. If you think about it, what does the Fed do during a recession? They do QE and they lower interest rates. Who does that help? That helps the asset owners. It helps corporations as well, because then they can hire more people. It's a second order derivative on how it would help the middle class, but they don't have assets. So primarily, you're jacking up asset prices, hoping rich people spend more so that businesses hire more people so that it trickles down. That is truly trickle down economics. And what happens when the Fed raises rates? Immediately people get fired in anticipation that the economy is going to go down. So on one hand, you help the rich, and on the other hand, you hurt the poor. There's other reasons for inequality as well, but they're two levers. When they push them both at the same time towards QE and cutting rates, that helps the rich, and in the other direction, it hurts the poor. Now, is fiscal spending good for the poor? Are never-ending wars good for the poor? Of course not. There's other reasons for inequality. Competition is another one. Think about Visa and MasterCard, who have a payment monopoly, that have lobbyists, that allow credit card rates to be 27, 29%. That's not what a 700 credit score should have. So there are other reasons why there's inequality, but my argument is that the number one is the Federal Reserve. As you've seen it get more powerful since the 80s, what has happened? Home prices have gone up, affordability has gone down, wages have stagnated. Why? Because capital has an edge over labor. Jerome Powell is smart. A lot of these PhD economists are, but that is built up off of bad logic. It is not free market economics. It is not the basis of what made this country great. And I don't mean that the Federal Reserve controls prices in the economy, but they lift all prices up when they lower the cost of capital. And of course, when they inject money into the economy. More money in the economy means the value of a dollar goes down. Like, that's pretty simple. I would like to see a discussion on this because I do not think it's a party issue. I think a populist movement could get this done in my lifetime. It's going to be hard, but we got to start talking. Modern monetary theory is built on neo-Keynesianism, which is a bastardization of Keynesianism. John Maynard Keynes is actually one of my favorite economists. He's extremely witty and very smart. He argued for government expenditures during a downturn to smooth out the economic cycles. He did not argue for monetarianism. So I welcome people of both parties and the middle to discuss this issue because the Federal Reserve is not accountable to you. They do not serve you. They serve the elitists in this country, the people that are ultra wealthy. You want to talk about how to help the billionaires? You give the central bank more power.